There are evenings so ordinary they're easily forgotten. But then, just one different step, a glance held at the right moment, and the world shifts in a new direction. Ethan Cole, 28 years old, and the youngest CEO in Coltech's history, had just left his office after a long day of reports and strategy meetings. He didn't take his usual private car home. He wanted to walk for a bit to breathe in something more real than LED lights and clacking mechanical keyboards in a boardroom. And right at that run-down street corner where the wealthy usually speed up to avoid looking, he saw her. A young woman sitting alone on a public bench. In front of her was a cardboard sign handwritten neatly. No request for money, no cry for help. I used to be a top student. Now I need a chance. She looked about 24. She had brown skin and curly hair tied neatly in a high bun. She wore a worn but clean coat. Her face was calm as still water. She was not trying to look pitiful or defiant in daring others to feel pity. Ethan was about to keep walking like everyone else. But something about the way she held her posture and the unwavering look in her eyes made him stop. He walked over, slowly. He didn't ask her name. He didn't offer money. He sat down just far enough beside her and asked, "Are you okay?" She turned to him. Her deep eyes met his, still but not cold. Better than most people assume. Ethan smiled a little and offered his hand. "I'm Ethan." She looked at his hand momentarily, then took it in a firm but unforced handshake. "Ariana." A few seconds of silence followed. But it wasn't awkward. A shared pause was enough for both to realize this conversation wasn't like anything they'd experienced. He glanced at the cardboard sign, "A top student business management. I used to be at the top of my class, had a scholarship, then my mum got sick. I dropped out and worked 3 jobs to take care of her. When she passed away, I had nothing left. No way to go back." Her voice didn't shake, didn't break. She spoke like someone used to not being heard, but now was talking to someone who genuinely wanted to understand. Ethan remained silent. Then suddenly he said an idea flashed before his brain, which he couldn't filter. "My company's having its annual gala tomorrow night. Everyone's allowed a guest. I haven't picked one. If you don't have plans—" Ariana tilted her head, half amused, half intrigued. "You're inviting a homeless girl to your company gala?" Ethan blushed. "It might sound odd, but I don't see you as homeless. I see someone with a lot that's going to waste." Ariana said nothing for a few seconds. Then she nodded slightly. "I've never worn a gown to a party, but maybe this is how you start over." Ethan picked Ariana up the next morning outside a small coffee shop near the park. She wore an old sweater and worn shoes, but her presence was the same as the night before, upright, calm, not asking anything from anyone. He took her to a thrift store called Second Chances. It wasn't fancy, but the owner had once lived in poverty herself. She didn't look at Ariana with pity, but with quiet empathy. Ariana walked in slowly, moving through the racks of dresses, her fingers grazing the fabrics as if rediscovering forgotten memories. Then she stopped in front of a black dress. It was simple cut with a round neckline and 3/4 sleeves, not flashy but elegant. Ethan nodded. "Try it on." A few minutes later, the fitting room door opened. Ariana stepped out, and in that moment time seemed to freeze. The dress didn't turn her into someone else. It simply brought into focus everything she already was self-possessed, graceful and something else scarce, the kind of presence you can't name but can't stop looking at. Ethan stood still. "You're wonderful." Ariana smiled the first time he'd seen her look. Unsure. It's been a long time since I saw myself like this in the mirror. On the way back, they stopped at a small Italian place where Ethan used to eat when he was a broke college student without a business card or boardroom chair. They ordered pasta and lemonade and began talking not as CEO and stranger, but like two people who had found something familiar in the middle of a city of millions. When Ariana spoke about being turned away from a job support center because she had no fixed address, Ethan gently squeezed her hand. "We're going to change that." She looked at him. "Who's we?" Ethan smiled. "Me. And you if you're in." Ariana paused for a few seconds, then she gave a soft nod. "Then, let's start tomorrow night." Grand Horizon, the most luxurious hotel in the city, glowed with lights like a stage made for pride. From the chandeliered ceiling, crystal lights reflected onto hundreds of clinking wine glasses held by people with prestigious names, titles, and shares. Ethan entered the ballroom, one hand in his pocket, his eyes calm but focused. But this time, no one looked at him. All eyes were on the woman beside him. Ariana. She walked beside him, the simple black dress hugging her slender figure. Her curly hair was swept up in a neat bun, a few strands falling artfully. Her face wore minimal makeup, just a touch of soft lipstick, highlighting her eyes that had once looked at the world from a street corner and were now staring directly back at a world trying to make sense of her. No one in the room knew who she was, and that fact alone made them uncomfortable. Glances were exchanged, heads tilted slightly for discreet whispers, smirks half hidden behind glasses of wine. Who's Ethan here with? Not someone from the company. A hired PR escort or some test. Ariana sensed it all, but she didn't flinch. She had once sat at the foot of this very lit-up building on a rainy night hugging a torn backpack. And now she walked across the marble floor, spine straight each step, steady, not to prove anything but to exist. Ethan leaned slightly toward her, whispering, "You okay?" She smiled, eyes unwavering. "You think I'd let their stares shrink me?" He chuckled. "I think they're the ones feeling small." Together they entered the ballroom, just as the classical music swelled from the live orchestra. Soft light fell onto her shoulders like the frame of a living portrait. Sarah greeted them, head of public affairs, known for her sharp wit and sharper tongue. "Ethan," she smiled, eyes quickly scanning Ariana, "I thought you were coming alone." Ethan replied without hesitation, "This is Ariana, a friend of mine." Sarah extended a hand with a courteous handshake, but layered with challenge. "Pleasure to meet you." "What field are you in?" Ariana took her hand firmly but gently. "I used to juggle 3 jobs at once, no official title. But I know exactly how this system leaves people behind." Sarah blinked in surprise, not because of what was said, but because of how it was said, not with bitterness or blame, but with clarity so stark no one could argue. A few people nearby started paying closer attention. Their eyes were no longer merely scrutinizing, they were guarded. Ethan left Ariana for a few minutes, pulled aside by the board for quick discussions. When he returned, he saw her standing at the wine bar, speaking with the deputy head of HR. She wasn't forcing anything. She asked pointed questions about hiring culture and how fit was measured, and offered insights that left the HR team uncomfortably silent. That's when Ethan realized Ariana didn't need to be led. She was leading the room back toward truths they had long ignored. When he reached her, she turned to him. "I just debated someone who doesn't believe people who failed can ever rise again." "Did you win?" Ethan asked. She smiled. I wasn't speaking to win, I was speaking to make them reconsider. The evening reached its peak. The senior executive stepped onto the stage with a microphone to begin his speech. Ethan and Ariana stood toward the back near the glass wall overlooking the city. "This is the first time I've stood in a room like this," she said, voice low. "Not because I wasn't capable, but because no one ever gave me the chance to walk in." Ethan looked at her, and now she turned eyes reflecting the chandeliers above. "Now I think I need to open this door for others too." Ariana exited the ballroom, not sneaking out, not bowing her head. A group who had whispered earlier now watched her not with disdain, but with genuine curiosity. And when Ethan stepped beside her, she said softly, "Tonight I didn't make them like me, but I made them remember me." The night sky above the Grand Horizon Hotel hung like a still velvet curtain, cut by faint beams from nearby skyscrapers. Below it, the party continued clinks of glasses and conversations soaked in expensive wine and practiced politeness. But no one noticed the large door that had just opened. The man who stepped in was unmistakable, tall, silver-haired, with eyes sharp as blades, honed by triumph and tragedy. The room seemed still in that moment, for the man was Jonathan Blake, founder of the financial empire Blake Capital and one of Coltech's key strategic investors. His arrival unannounced, unescorted, immediately cooled the room's energy. Ethan and Ariana stood in a rear corridor, catching their breath away from the spotlight. And then Ethan felt her shoulder tense like a cold wave rushing up her spine. Ariana stood motionless. Her back was straight, her gaze locked on the doorway where Jonathan Blake had entered. In her eyes wasn't fear, but a storm of emotions, anger, longing, hurt, and something that bordered on despair. Ethan turned to her, his look asking, "Do you know him?" She didn't answer, but her unguarded expression spoke for her. Jonathan scanned the room, his eyes skipped over familiar shareholders and eager executives. He was looking for someone. And when his gaze landed on Ariana, time seemed to shatter. His steps faltered. The face that once commanded Wall Street's highest circles turned ghostly pale, like he had just seen an apparition. He walked straight toward her. No one dared intervene. No one understood. Only Ethan, standing beside Ariana, felt the room vanish around them, leaving just the three of them surrounded by 100 murmuring eyes. Jonathan stopped directly in front of her. His eyes never left hers. Ariana, the name was spoken not with the voice of a tycoon, but of a father trembling and unsteady. Ariana looked up, meeting his eyes, her gaze calm, almost cold. "Hello, Dad." The room fell silent as if frozen. Ethan stood speechless. Every whisper in the room turned into an undercurrent. "She's Jonathan Blake's daughter, Ariana Blake. But she disappeared almost 2 years ago." "No way." Jonathan stared at her, his lips pressed tight, his eyes trying to stay composed but failing. "You're still alive." Ariana let out a faint smile, not of joy. "Alive, and more truly than ever." "Why?" he choked. "Because I didn't want to be another pawn in your political chess game. I left to find myself again." Those words, spoken in a room built on calculated dialogue, drained the air out of every corner. Jonathan reached out a hand, but Ariana stepped back half a pace, still calm, still standing tall. Ethan moved slightly forward instinctively, trying to shield her from the crowd's stares, but Ariana placed her hand gently on his, signaling, "Let me face this." She turned to Jonathan, her gaze no longer cold but unmistakably clear. "I didn't disappear. so you could search for me. I disappeared so you could no longer control anyone." Then she turned away. No tears, no glances back. She took Ethan's hand not as thanks, but as a decision. Ariana walked out of the grand hall. Cold wind brushed through her hair. But this time she didn't shiver. Ethan walked silently beside her. "Now you know who I am," she said softly. He answered without hesitation, "I know. But I still see someone who walked away from a throne to step onto the ground. And no one does that without real courage." Ariana paused. "I don't need praise. I want to be believed in." Ethan looked at her, his eyes steady, voice firm. "I don't believe in titles. I believe in what people do when no one's watching." She nodded, quietly, then whispered as if to herself, "Then let's see what I can do from here." The penthouse Ethan lived in wasn't as lavish as many imagined a young CEO's home to be. It was quiet, tidy, filled only with what was truly necessary. From the earth-toned leather chair by the window, one could see the glittering city skyline where Ariana now sat, holding a cup of ginger tea gone cold. The night after the gala, the city still shone as always. But inside her something was softening, not anger, but a long stretch of silence between words never spoken. Ariana sat quietly for a while. Ethan didn't push. He sat across from her, eyes patient, ready to listen even through silence. Then she began. No preface, no apology for the long story ahead. "I didn't run away, Ethan. I disappeared." Her voice was even, not cold, not dramatic. "Growing up with the name Blake, I was taught to enter a room as if I owned it. But no one ever taught me to stay if that room swallowed my soul." She looked out the window where headlights streaked like timelines. "After my mother died, my father tried to mold me into his ideal version of himself. Strong, controlled, emotionless. I was promised a perfect future, a seat on the board, a carefully arranged marriage to a suitable man I felt nothing for." Her voice faltered slightly. "I stopped feeling like myself. Every step, every decision wasn't mine. And then one morning in a Manhattan penthouse, I woke up and didn't recognize the girl in the mirror." Ethan watched her, his eyes unwavering. "So I left without a word. No message. I took cash and rented the cheapest room in a city where no one knew me. Day by day, I lost all the things that used to earn me admiration. And strangely, I started to see something I'd never seen before, the truth." She turned to face Ethan. "The truth is, there are capable, decent, and determined people who get trampled by this world. They weren't born in the right place, not because they're wrong. And I, someone who used to sit at the head of the table, had never seen them." The air between them grew quiet again, as if making space for the truth just revealed. Ethan bowed his head. "And I was the first person who stopped." Ariana nodded slightly. "You didn't know who I was, didn't see anything I had, but you still stopped. Still invited me to a table I never thought I belonged at." Her voice dropped. "And because of that, I owe you an apology." Ethan looked surprised. "An apology for not telling you who I was, for letting you walk into a storm you weren't ready for doubting your kindness was real." He was quiet for a moment, then gently said, "Ariana, you owe me nothing. If you owe anything, it's to yourself." She looked up. "Debt for what?" "A debt to yourself to live truthfully, and I think you've just started repaying that debt." Ariana smiled for the first time since she stepped out of the party. "So what will you do with a girl who overturned your entire party and your whole system?" Ethan stood, walked over to her, and extended his hand, not forcefully, just an invitation. I'll do the right thing with you, not out of guilt, but because the world needs someone like you, standing tall, speaking truthfully, and never bowing. Ariana placed her hand in his. Steady, certain. Then, where do we start? Ethan smiled. With those who've been turned away. With the doors slammed in their faces, and with the first question I ever asked you. He paused, squeezing her hand gently. Are you okay? The next morning, Ariana sat in front of the old computer in Ethan's small office. She typed the first line of the plan, Bridgepoint Project, a door that doesn't ask where you're from, but where you want to go. And beneath that, she added, written by someone who once sat on the sidelines and was finally seen. The Bridgepoint plan was typed quickly on a pale grey morning that hinted at coming rain. But each sentence Ariana wrote glowed with clarity, as if she were striking sparks bit by bit for something far larger than either. Ethan walked into the office, shirt sleeves unbuttoned, carrying 2 cups of hot coffee. When he saw Ariana working intently, he set a cup beside her without interrupting. He didn't need to ask. He could see in her eyes that she had found what she was meant to do. Ariana didn't look up, but she said softly, if I used to be someone left outside the door, then now I want to be the one holding the handle. Ethan nodded, and I'll build the doors if you decide who needs to walk through. 3 weeks later, an old warehouse on the city's south side was chosen as the first site. The space, once a derelict lumberyard, was now painted in warm tones. Soft amber lighting chairs and tables repurposed from liquidated companies. On the wall, a hand-painted message, Bridgepoint, a place to begin again without needing to prove anything. Ethan looked around, his heart beating with a strange rhythm, not the thrill of billion-dollar deals, but the rare stillness of doing something right. Ariana was different. She didn't say much. She observed. She adjusted bulletin boards, straightened crooked chairs, and corrected how volunteers spoke to the first group of applicants. No one knew she was Jonathan Blake's daughter. She didn't need that name to be heard. She needed space for others to be heard. At the launch press conference, reporters grew curious. They found no trace of Blake in the project, but saw Coltech listed as a personal sponsor. A journalist asked Ethan, "This project doesn't generate profit. Why invest so heavily?" Ethan smiled, no notes in hand. "Because I believe in the power of being seen. I once saw someone the world ignored, and she changed my life." Meanwhile, Ariana began teaching the first class. It was a small room with just 6 people, each from different walks of life, one man unemployed due to a decade-old conviction, a single mother recently laid off a young man living in his car. Ariana didn't start with the lecture. She shared, "I once sat on the edges of a world I thought I didn't deserve. But the truth is everyone deserves a chance at the right moment." And she wrote on the board, "We don't teach you how to succeed like others. We help you return to who you are." No one clapped, but the eyes in the room began to shift. They did not see her as a teacher, but as someone who knew them from within. A week later, Bridgepoint began spreading like a quiet ripple, not loud but steady. Some called it naive. Some said it won't last long, it'll run out of funding soon. And then the inevitable Jonathan Blake showed up. He called Ariana to request a private meeting with no press or intermediaries. Ethan asked if she wanted to go. She looked him in the eye. "I'm not going to listen. I'm going so he has to listen." In the wide, glass-walled boardroom, Jonathan sat at the head of the table. Ariana walked in, no secretary, no lawyer, just herself, the same girl he once called the stubborn daughter. Jonathan spoke slowly. Bridgepoint is getting attention. There are other ways to help people without becoming a target. Ariana sat down, her eyes locked on his. I'm not choosing safety, I'm choosing truth. Jonathan paused in silence, then said, You can come back. With your old name, with resources. You don't need to do all this from zero. Ariana replied without hesitation, No, you're wrong. This isn't zero. This is 1. The city began to change seasons. The early winter chill didn't slow the traffic, but it made people notice the more minor things: the misted breath in the air, the click of heels on the sidewalk, and the small orange sign posted in front of a once-abandoned building, Bridgepoint, where every story gets to begin again. 3 centers had opened in just 6 months. No grand opening, no advertising campaigns, yet the number of registered participants tripled initial projections. Among them were names once written off as beyond saving: former addicts, bankrupts, people who had served time for youthful mistakes. They came. They sat. They listened. And slowly they began to speak. Ariana no longer taught classes. She stepped back to write the curriculum, train instructors, and build a network of volunteers. But sometimes she would quietly appear in a classroom only to ask a single question: What did you learn about yourself today? One evening in the main hall of the Central Center, more than 100 people filled every seat. The media had been invited, not for PR, but because Bridgepoint had just received a partnership offer from the city's Department of Education to integrate its model into programs for high school dropouts. Ariana stepped onto the stage. A simple dark navy dress, her hair neatly tied back. No mic. No projector behind her. Just her. And the truth: I once believed I was someone society had discarded. I once stood before the doors of opportunity and was turned away simply because I no longer had a home address. But today I'm standing here not because I'm special, but because someone once stopped, looked at me, and asked, Are you okay? The room went utterly still. Bridgepoint wasn't built to be a rescue organization. We don't promise to make you rich. We are simply a place where everyone can be seen as a human being, not a case file. Applause followed, not rehearsed, not obligatory, but deeply sincere. The next morning, a photo went viral on social media. Ariana crouched beside a 10-year-old girl at the center, drawing their life maps with crayons. The caption from the girl's account read, She used to be homeless. Now she's teaching us how to rebuild the home in our minds. The image was shared by celebrities, politicians, and even former students who had once left in silence. And within a week, Bridgepoint had become a symbol. Ethan met Ariana in their small office, which they jokingly called Mission Control. He brought a proposal from a major corporate chain inviting her to speak at an international conference on social transformation. She read it over, then placed it down, her gaze heavy. I'm not sure I want to become the face of something. Ethan sat across from her. But you already are. You don't need to stand in the spotlight. Just doing the right thing is enough. People will notice. Ariana looked down, fingers loosely clasped. I'm not afraid of being seen. I'm afraid that one day I won't resemble the girl who once sat on the curb. Ethan looked at her. His eyes are unwavering. Then remember this: you're not here to represent anyone. You're here to remind people that light can come from the darkest places. Ariana stood at the doorway of a new classroom. Inside, Tanya, a former student, was now teaching basic financial skills to young adults who had once been pushed out of the education system. On the board, Tanya had written, "You don't need a perfect resume. You need one reason to begin again." Ariana smiled, a deep, quiet smile. Then she pulled out her phone, opened her notes app, and typed a single line. "Bridgepoint doesn't need someone to lead. It needs people willing to stand beside." The city was just as busy, chaotic, and sometimes brutally cold, but in small corners, barely noticeable people who had once been forgotten were now teaching others how to stand up. One rainy Monday morning, Ariana pushed open the doors of Bridgepoint's main center. She was no longer the coordinator today, she was just a visitor. A former student who had once lived in a bus shelter, she was now teaching communication skills to youth who'd never been taught to speak for themselves. She stood quietly at the doorway, watching a 16-year-old boy try to say his first full greeting aloud. His hands shook and his eyes stayed low, but his voice was no longer whispered. And when he finished, there was no applause, no cheers. Just Ariana's eyes are full of tears meeting his. A silent nod, as if to say, "You just reclaimed something the world once took from you." That afternoon, Ethan took Ariana to a newly approved building site for the fourth Bridgepoint Center. No longer a repurposed warehouse. This time, an old elementary school has been abandoned for nearly a decade. "I remember this place," Ariana said, walking past the worn seats in the old auditorium. "I once hid in that hallway because I didn't dare to enter the counseling room." Ethan walked beside her in silence. "Do you want to reopen the counseling room now?" he asked. Ariana paused. "No, I want to tear it down and build a waiting room where no one has to explain themselves." The two sat by the window in Ariana's small apartment that night. No wine, no music, just ginger tea and a little silence. Ethan asked, "What if I hadn't stopped that day?" Ariana looked at him. "Then maybe I would have still been alive, but I wouldn't have truly lived." A long, quiet pause. Ethan poured more tea, his voice steady and low. "And if tomorrow everyone forgets about Bridgepoint, would you regret it?" Ariana smiled softly. "No, because there are people who once sat out in the cold, believing they were invisible, who now teach others how to live." 1 week later, Ariana was walking through the park when she saw an older woman curled up on a bench. In front of her was a plastic bag containing all her belongings. There was no sign asking for help, no eyes begging for attention, only a silence, deeply familiar. Ariana stopped. She didn't ask what the woman needed. She walked over and gently sat down beside her. "I'm Ariana," she said. "If you're feeling cold, I know a place with warm tea where no one will ask where you came from." The woman turned to her, her eyes welled with tears, her mouth moved saying something inaudible, and then she nodded. Ariana stood up and extended her hand, not forced, not theatrical. "I'll walk beside you, not to lead, but to walk with you." The woman placed her hand in Ariana's, a trembling, weathered hand, and stood. They walked toward the Bridgepoint Center, through a stream of people passing by as if they saw nothing. A new class opened that day at the fourth Bridgepoint Center. On the wall was a small wooden plaque, hand-carved with the words, "This place wasn't built with money. It was built with a glance and a timely hand." The camera slowly pulls back. Ariana's voice echoes like a closing message. "I'm not someone special. I'm just someone who was once stopped at the right time. And if you're hearing this story, maybe you are the next one to stop." To begin a journey no one can predict. Only know that it will change someone forever. Final words appear against a black screen. If you've ever walked past someone sitting at the edge of the street, please don't turn away too quickly, because maybe they're the next Ariana, or maybe you're the next Ethan.